Guys, it's Horror Studio 1 here. Let's try to do this one take non-stop. Basically, I just had a recent midnight experience, so I made this video. Basically, a couple nights ago, if you guys haven't seen my Midnight Horror Stories number 7, I talked about driving with my friend down the end of this road, and it ended up being at like some person's house. And we're like, you know what, we were bored that night, so we decided to go do it again. So me, my friend, and another friend of ours, we decided to do this, and we went to the end of the road. This time, though, we decided to get out of the car and go a little further down the road. Now, just to describe this road, if you guys haven't seen the previous video, I'm doing this one take, by the way, no cuts, no NGs, this is it, yo. Trying to get this out as true and as quick as possible, because I was really overthinking this, to be honest. I was thinking, should I tell you guys the story? It seems kind of sketchy, edgy a little bit, I'm not sure what the comments will be from you guys if I did something wrong in the story, so you guys can be the judge of that if you guys think I messed up or anything like that. But basically, we went to the end of this road, and then we got out of the car as before. It's this like long stretch of country road. There's no lights around, no street lamps, no other cars, and it's like 3-4 a.m. in the morning. And we decided to get out of the car, and then we were just walking around, right? We went to the same path that we did last time. It was through these thick trees inside the forest, right? And it was the middle of the night. There was no stars, no nothing, just clouds and darkness everywhere, and not a sound in sight, not a sound within earshot, basically. And we're walking, and we see lights this time. So before, we thought that place was abandoned or that no one lived there. It was like a summer home for somebody, right? But this time, at the end of that road, because we kept on driving and driving and driving down for like 40 minutes in one straight direction, we went to that side of the road, and it actually wasn't abandoned as we thought, and then there was actually someone inside, and we looked over, there was lights, and it was someone's kitchen, and we're like kind of just sneaking on the ground, trying to keep as low as possible through the trees, right beside the trees, like trying to skimp past along the trees kind of thing, right? And then we see a lady there, and she's just pacing back and forth. This is like 3-4 in the morning. It's like an old lady, right? And then she's pacing back and forth. She just stops. She looks up. She stares at us. I was the guy at the very end. So my friend was in front of me. My other friend was taking charge. He was excited as shit because that was his first time there. And I was in the end. And I saw her look at me, and she saw me in the darkness, pitch black, and we just ran the hell out of there. I know we're kind of like, it wasn't really her backyard, it was just the woods surrounding her backyard, so I guess technically we weren't trespassing. And I feel bad for kind of maybe if we scared her, but she scared the shit out of me, because we'll be pacing back and forth at 3 in the morning, and she just stared at me like it was nothing. Just blank stare, and, we weren't planning to do anything crazy. It wasn't like a prank or anything, we just wanted to go on an adventure, I guess. So, yeah, that was my midnight horror story. It was kind of creepy, it got our adrenaline running, but it was I realized it's something that stupid kids would do. And I guess I'm that stupid kid. Anyways, grab a blanket, turn off your lights for these true scary midnight horror stories number 9. Haven't been camping since. In May 2009, I had just broken up with my girlfriend of almost 3 years. We had moved from Calgary to Toronto, and we're still stuck living together after the breakup, as we didn't know many people in the city yet. Needless to say, the situation was pretty stressful and upsetting. So when a buddy I was going to school with at the time suggested a weekend camping and fishing trip, I jumped at the chance. He grew up in an area about an hour outside of Toronto, called Flamborough. It's really beautiful, loads of lush forest, farmers' fields, and small rivers and creeks. We decided to camp and fish along a creek called Grindstone Creek. It's close to some wetlands, and the fishing is supposed to be great. We ended up setting up our camp in what was probably a farmer's field. I'm guessing it was trespassing on our part, bordered by a gorgeous forest. We spent the evening fishing, shooting the shit, and drinking some quality craft beers. As it got darker, we made a little fire and roasted potatoes and hot dogs. All in all, it was a really good night. We turned in just after midnight. We shared a tent. My buddy fell asleep before me, and I stayed up playing on my phone until probably 1:30. I must have drifted off because the next thing I remember was being woken up by a high-pitched yipping type noise. I was kinda groggy and it took me a moment to fully awake. The yipping was incessant and sounded like a weird coyote. I laid there for a moment listening, and then started playing on my phone again. The noise was annoying as hell. I tried ignoring it, but it sounded like it was getting closer. Finally, it sounded like it had to be no more than 10 feet away from the camp. At this point, I was getting a little unsettled. I mean, I had seen coyotes in Calgary before, and I thought them as pretty harmless. They never looked much bigger than a smallish dog, but what if this was one rabbit or something? What if it could smell our food or something? I have a pretty bad anxiety disorder, so I'm prone to worrying about these types of things. I nudged my buddy to see if he was awake, and he was. The noise woke him up too. We discussed what to do about the coyote, as we hadn't brought anything to scare off critters. Not a BB gun, nothing. Finally, he decided he would shine the flashlight on it and holler a lot, hopefully scaring him off. He unzipped the tent, and I watched him pointing the flashlight out into the darkness. I'll never forget what happened next. His legs suddenly went all wobbly, and sort of stumbled back into the tent. He had a really dumbfounded look on his face, and he looked at me and babbled, "It's not a coyote. It's a dude. It's some weird dude." Normally, I would have thought he was messing with me, but I've never seen someone look that scared. I never want to see that expression on anyone's face ever again, so I knew he wasn't pulling my leg. The weird yipping and howling type noises were still going on, and in retrospect, it really didn't sound like a coyote, but I guess in our groggy state, it was a way for our brains to make sense of it. Anyways, he kept telling me just to look out the tent flap to make sure he's not crazy. At this point, I was having a full-blown anxiety attack. My heart was just racing. I felt like shit, but I had to look. So, I slowly peeked out the flap and waited for my eyes to adjust, and that's when I saw him. He was standing only a few arms lengths away from the tent. He was swaying a little and wearing a baseball cap. What made it awful, though, what was really, really creepy, was that he was wearing women's lingerie. That's when I knew there was most likely something very wrong with this guy. After I pulled my head back inside the tent, my buddy and I discussed what to do. Finally, we decided to yell at the guy to fuck off. My buddy started yelling, "Excuse me, can you fuck off? We're trying to sleep in here." The noise stopped. It was dead silence. And that's when we heard footsteps running towards our tent. They stopped right outside the tent, but we didn't waste any time. We started yelling again. "Seriously, fuck off! We have cell phones in here. If you don't fuck off, we're gonna call the cops." With that, we heard him walk by the tent and head off. Sounded like he was moving towards the road. Needless to say, we laid awake, petrified, until the first sign of sunlight. Then, we hightailed it the hell out of there. We discussed our experience on our way home, and were both pretty embarrassed about how scared we got. It definitely was not manly on either of our parts. I think because we were both ashamed of how we let some weirdo freak us out so much. We really haven't never talked about it since that day, so there you go. There's my weird story. I've always wondered what the hell the guy was doing out there, or what was wrong with him. Sometimes I wonder if things would have turned out differently if we were a couple girls. I'm not saying he was some serial killer, but seemed like he was testing who was inside the tent. Guess I'll never know. And for that, I'm kinda glad. Your booty hole is your beauty hole. Black adult male. I'm glad to have run into this forum, since I don't have anyone in real life to talk with about this. It has been creeping me out, and I'm afraid my boys will just laugh at me if I tell them. Anyways, about a year ago, I moved from Detroit to a small town in Mississippi for work. I usually use my cell for phone calls, but I had got a landline for dial-up internet, but for landline calls too. I got an unlisted number on the landline and didn't give up my number to anyone. I always give up my cell phone number to people who may need to call me. One of my first nights in bed, my landline rang about midnight. A female voice said in an emotionless monotone, "Charlie." I replied, "Yeah." She went on to say, "Your booty hole is your beauty hole." I chuckled and asked, "Who is this?" Before I got the question fully out of my mouth, she hung up on me. Sometimes I would leave my internet plugged in, but anytime I had my phone plugged in, I got those called around midnight. It happened one night while I was watching a ball game, so I know I wasn't just dreaming it. She never would stay on long enough for me to talk with her, so I just started to leave my internet plugged in so she couldn't wake me up. But each time was the same. "Charlie, your booty hole is your beauty hole." One night a couple months later, my cell battery had died, so I used my landline. I forgot to plug my internet back in, and around midnight, my landline rang. When I answered, a man said, "Charlie?" I said, "Yeah?" He said, "Charlie!" Having been woken up from my sleep by this guy, I was pissed off and said, "What's up, Nick? Talk to me." He said, "Your booty hole is your beauty hole." This guy had a really evil, demonic sounding voice. Even though I know it was just a person, it was still creepy, and it took me a while to fall back asleep. I don't know how these people know my name and unlisted number like that, and why in the world would they be telling me that? What is their motive? Do they expect me to represent the state of Mississippi in the black man's asshole beauty pageant or something like that? Eventually, I made it a point to have my internet plugged in, but I dropped my guard the other night. I had my landline plugged in while charging my cell, and the phone rang again around midnight. Obviously, these people must call every single night around the same time, every night, just waiting for me to slip and have my landline phone on. The other night when it rang, I answered it ready to give a homeboy a piece of my mind. Except this time, it was a little kid. The kid said, "Charlie," and he sobbed as he said this. "Your booty hole is your beauty hole." Then he hung up. It's sick enough that grown-ups would call me like that, but it's even worse to be getting kids involved. I'm not going to plug my landline in anymore. I never received anything in the mail or get crazy calls on my cell phone, but I don't understand why people would do this to me. I don't know many people here and don't know how anyone got my number and knew my name. I know it's not a creepy story, but I'm a big dude and this creeped me out. Peace. The reason I always lock my door. So, this was back in 2012 or so. I was living in a 3-bedroom apartment with my best friend Lisa and another roommate Derek, along with 2 cats, Mango and Jojo. Over the past few months, the newspapers had been full of stories about a guy sneaking into young women's homes in the south end of my city. They would wake up to find him watching them sleep, or else see someone peeking into their windows. Usually, he'd just look. Sometimes he spoke. And his actions eventually progressed to sexual touching. He would always flee before police arrived, and usually before the woman involved could even fully grasp what was going on. We lived on what was technically the north end of the city, though kind of on the edge. And although Lisa and I were technically in this creep's target demographic, neither of us were students and weren't in an all-female house, so I had never really worried about it. About a day or two before the incident in question, the papers reported that a suspect had been arrested. One Saturday night, Lisa was working the overnight shift at our local fast food restaurant. Derek and I watched some Scrubs and both headed to bed around midnight. I woke up to the sound of the apartment door opening at some point. I assumed that Lisa was coming home from her shift, but glanced at my phone and saw that it was only around 4 in the morning. Lisa's shift didn't end until 7. An off feeling immediately crept over me. I wondered if I had dreamt the door opening, but I knew I hadn't. Even though every part of my subconscious was screaming that something was wrong, the rational side of my brain won over. Maybe the shift had been especially quiet. Since Lisa's work was so close to her home, they might have let her go home early. Or maybe she had been sick. It was also possible that Derek had gone out without my noticing and was now returning. I also thought that maybe I had heard him leaving, although it wasn't like him to be up so early. I realized I hadn't heard the click of the lock. This meant that whoever had arrived, or left, hadn't locked the door behind them. This wasn't entirely unusual. Both Lisa and Derek were from small towns, and hadn't quite gotten in the habit of locking the door now that they were in the city. I decided that since I was up, I should at least lock the door. I opened my bathroom door to peer out. I was wearing a tank top and underwear, and didn't want to make Derek uncomfortable if he was within sight of my room. As I opened the door, I found myself face to face with a man, his hand still reaching out for my bedroom doorknob. I must have startled him because he took a step back. I'm not sure why I didn't yell or scream. Maybe I was too scared. Instead, in a calm voice, I asked, "Who are you? And why are you in my apartment?" My brain was rushing to rationalize this guy's presence. He was around my age. Maybe Lisa or Derek had forgotten to tell me that they were letting a friend stay over, but no, Lisa was at work, and Derek had gone to bed when I had. Maybe he was drunk and wandered into the wrong apartment. I would explain the goofy grin on his face, except that as I looked again, that grin wasn't a goofy one. It was manic. He didn't answer me, so I asked again, "Who are you? And what the hell are you doing in my apartment?" No answer. He kept grinning. I can't remember his hair color, though it might have been reddish blonde. I couldn't tell you what color his eyes were, what he was wearing, or even whether he had something in his hands, anything in his hands. I have a weird sense when I look back on it that there was something in his hands. A weapon? A bottle of beer? I have no fucking clue, because his smile was so completely and utterly terrifying that I could not remember anything else. I suddenly remembered that Derek was just down the hall. I realized I could call for help. Instead, I told him, "You need to leave. Now." He kept grinning, and my heart kept racing. He was too close for me to be sure of being able to close my bedroom door against him. I repeated myself again. He kept grinning, but he turned and left. Afterwards, I waited. I waited a few seconds, and then suddenly I left the distance between my bedroom door and the apartment door, flinging the deadbolt and sliding chain into place. I retreated back into my room, shook, but I had to do it. So I grabbed my phone, and I texted Lisa to let her know what had just happened and to be careful. Come the next day, my roommates both reported that they had not given any single person permission to enter the apartment that night. They also both agreed to be more careful about locking the door. Duh. That morning, I read in the newspaper that the police had released their suspect in the sleepwatching case because there was no proof. Although one guy was eventually arrested and charged in connection to the case, differing victim reports suggest that more than one man got up to the creepiness in my city around that time. So, we don't know who that guy was. Was it possible that he was the creepy sleepwatcher? I don't even know. Regardless, creepy guy who was quite possibly a serial sleepwatcher and whose grin still occasionally pops up in my nightmares. Let's never meet again.